following program was provided by an independent producer solely responsible for its content. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of this station, its staff, board of directors, or underwriters.
I spent 20 years trying to get out of this place. I was looking for something I couldn't replace. I was running away from the only thing I've ever known.
Okay, good evening, everybody, again. I was remiss in my last announcement. I do want to thank the people that came and helped us set up, especially Cindy that put together the meeting here. At this time, I would like to introduce Governor Scott Walker. As most of you know, a few things about the governor that I'm sure everybody in here knows, but that up here in New Hampshire at least we're very proud of him doing, and I hope he can continue to get it up here, is he got the right to work passed in the state of Wisconsin. Even with all the union and all the people sitting in the State House and threatening him and things like that. So we really appreciate that, but that all caused a recall election. And as we know, fortunately, he won that too. And then he went on to win an election again. So he's doing something right out there, a good conservative. It's our pleasure up here in the Pemi Valley to welcome Governor Scott Walker.
Thank you. Thanks. Thank you. Sorry about my back here. Thank you. Thank you all. Appreciate it. Well, thanks. First off, being here, I should start by saying this. Freedom, endowed by our Creator, defined by our Constitution, but defended each and every day by the men and women who proudly wear the uniform of these United States. To all of you who are veterans, would you stand for a minute so we can appropriately wave out here? Appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate it. I particularly appreciate being here at an American Legion post. I love all of our veterans organizations, but the American Legion has been particularly good to me over the years. I got my first interest in public service going into my senior year in high school 30 years ago. I went to Boys State, Ripon College, Badger Boys State, and then the Legion was good enough to pick me from Wisconsin to be one of two young men to go to Boys Nation in our nation's capital. On the day I announced my candidacy last month, I mentioned two people at the beginning, two veterans. Mr. Claire Condon, who was a World War I and a World War II veteran who lived about 3 houses up from me, and his American Legion post in my small town I grew up in sent me to Boys State. And then Bob Turner, who just finished off about 35 years as the director of programming at the American Legion Boys Nation program. He was my adult counselor. He's a Vietnam veteran from Georgia, first Vietnam veteran who had the honor of being the American Legion commander in 1990 and 91 nationwide. Those two men and the others who put on those programs had an incredible impact on me. So to all of you here, but particularly the folks from this post and other posts like it across this country, on behalf of me and my family, both my boys went to Boys State. In fact, my son Matt actually was governor of Boys State. Can you believe it? I wasn't even governor of Boys State, so that was pretty good. But I think about the impact that the Legion and the auxiliary had with Boys State and Girls State. I've gone every year since then to speak at both Boys State and Girls State. So it's a good example with our veterans about how we've got men and women who've served our country and then come back and serve their communities over and over and over again. We very much appreciate that. Tonight we're going to talk a little bit about freedom, but we ought to start with where it all happens, and it's with our men and women in uniform. And lest we not forget, we've got still people serving right now, many of whom are in harm's way. So as you say your prayers tonight, don't forget about that either. I'm honored to be joined tonight. My wife, Tonette, the First Lady of Wisconsin, is here as well. It was almost like a date tonight. On the way over, we had a couple stops. We had a few minutes to spare, so we stopped at another Legion post on the way over and had a Miller Lite with a couple guys there. Miller Lite, we might smell a little like smoke because it was a lively place here. I need to be tucked in, she's telling me. Okay, that's right. She's looking out for me. So, but we had a good time. So it's kind of like date night, but not really, right? Although we've been on the campaign trail even on our anniversary, which is February 6th, which just happens to be Ronald Reagan's birthday. I always say, I remember, when Tonette's in the room, I remember Ronald Reagan's birthday because it's our wedding anniversary. If she was in the room, I'd tell you I remember our wedding anniversary because it's Ronald Reagan's birthday, but I'll stick with remembering it because it's our anniversary. But it's really an honor to be here tonight. I'm going to spend a couple minutes talking, and then we'll take about 45 minutes or so worth of questions and that, and have some fun. Again, my apologies to you back here. I'll try and turn around a little bit, although I ride a 2003 Anniversary Edition Road King, so I like a guy backing me up with a Harley shirt, and I got an A+ rating from the NRA. So I appreciate somebody backing me up with that, too. In fact, I'm going to come back, I think, in a few weeks and ride Road King around the state here. I figured hit all 10 counties, a couple days. We'll have some fun going around New Hampshire. The weather should be just about right, not too hot, not too cold, just about right. Might be a little colder the further up we go, but we're looking forward to it. Tonight, I just want to start with maybe just a little bit of a summary, and then, like I say, hear your questions, hear your comments, hear your responses. A lot of folks know a little bit about me. You mentioned, Henry, a little bit in the introduction. I've been elected not once, not twice, but 3 times. But maybe you don't know where it all started. You see, on November 2nd of 2010, I won election along with, in my state, everything was blue. Everything was Democrat, and then went all Republican on that night. Governor, lieutenant governor, both houses of the legislature, both U.S. senators, 5 out of 8 seats in Congress, all of them were Democrats. On November 2nd of 2010, which just happened to be my birthday, my gift was to the state, I said, not to me, but we elected a Republican governor, lieutenant governor, 2 new members of the House, so we now have the majority of seats, a new United States senator, and new majorities in the state assembly and the state senate. A week later, I met with all the Republican lawmakers. And our state capitol was open, so the press was there, and I told them then that the voters had sent a very clear message in making that kind of a shift. It was a fundamental shift, right, from one party to the other. And I said what the message was they didn't want us nibbling around the edges. They sent us a clear mandate to go out and do what we said we were going to do in the campaign. I said it was put up or shut up time, right? Of course, that was the headline all the press ran with. Walker says, put up or shut up. But it was true, because I said voters would have every right to throw us out if we didn't do the things we said we were going to do. And the good news in our case is we did. But a lot of people don't know this, and sometimes I have to remember that not everybody knows the story I've gone through. It wasn't just taking on the unions and the big government union bosses and the liberal special interests, which poured millions and millions of dollars in my state to try and take me out. Not once, but 2 times in a row after I was elected. Before that, the reason I said it was put up or shut up time, and the reason I had to keep pushing over and over again before we did our big reforms, was because the establishment in my own party really wasn't that eager to reform things either. You see, they kind of liked the title, they liked the position, they liked the bigger offices in the legislature, but they didn't want to rattle things up too much. They didn't want to shake the boat. And we didn't give them an option. We said, that's what you got to do. And so we took on the establishment in our own party, and once we did that, thank you. And you know what? Confidence begets confidence, because once we did that and we took on the first big reform, and they came after us and they did the protests and they did the death threats and they went after my family and they went after us in the recall. But along the way, we found once we did the first big thing, suddenly you get a little confidence and it starts to grow. And we didn't just take the power out of the hands of the big government union bosses and put it into the hands of the hardworking taxpayers. We fixed a $3.6 billion budget deficit. We cut taxes the first couple of years by $2 billion. New report just came out and said over the next couple of years, when it's 6 years into my term as governor in the state of Wisconsin, you know what the total amount of our tax relief is? It adds up to $4.7 billion over 6 years. We fixed our finances too. The rainy day fund's 165 times bigger than we took office. The pension's one of only 2 in the country fully funded. Our bonding levels are down to 20-year low. We've done the right things. Our schools are better because of our reforms, second best ACT scores in the country. Reading scores are up, graduation rates are up. Unemployment was once over 8%, it's now down to 4.6%. We've done the things you would want, and we did other things too. People forget about this. A lot of people talk about defunding Planned Parenthood these days. I defunded Planned Parenthood more than 4 years ago, long before those videos came out, because I knew it was the right thing to do. I was kidding about being backed up by the NRA, but I backed up our law-abiding citizens in our state. I signed Castle Doctrine and concealed carry right away so that law-abiding citizens could protect themselves, their families, and their loved ones. As was mentioned in the introduction, we became the 25th state in the nation to have the right to work, the freedom to work, whether you're in a labor union or not, going forward. We restored the Wisconsin GI Bill to make sure we took care of our veterans when they're not just those who just recently come back, for others out there. We did all sorts of reforms, and in our state, a blue state like Wisconsin, believe it or not, we now make it easy to vote but hard to cheat. We require a photo ID to vote in the state of Wisconsin. And so I tell you all those things because I'm going to talk to you in a minute with your questions, wherever you want to go in terms of my plans for the future. And I got plenty of solutions for how we move this country forward. But I tell you that for just a moment or two because I think it's important. Because there are 17 Republicans running, really some great candidates. Many of them I know either because they're people I've served with or got to know, or even a few of them have been supporters of mine in the past that come from the private sector. And so I appreciate the field that we have. And you're not going to hear me violate Ronald Reagan's 11th commandment. I'm not going to trash the other candidates out there. I will say 2 quick things. One about the field and one about the person we hope to face next November, or may face the way things are going, and that's Hillary Clinton. I mean, because think about it. Tonight, even today, another judge said that what she did violated the government procedures out there, which I'll touch on in a moment. But let me talk for a moment about the field, and then for a moment about Hillary Clinton, and then open it for questions. You look at this field, again, great field, probably the best field of Republicans we've had since 1980. I mean, a really quality field. So you say, well, obviously, many of you are probably here tonight. Some are your supporters. We appreciate that. Others might say, I'm here to figure out whether or not this guy is worthy of my vote come the first in the nation primary. And for those of you up in the air, particularly, I'd say, here's my appeal. There are, in this election, in this field of Republicans, there's really kind of 2 groups. There are winners and there are fighters. There are fighters who are really good at going after the problems in Washington. God bless them for being there. Many have served in Washington. Others are from the outside looking in, and they're good at identifying the fight and fighting the fight, but they haven't won those fights yet. And then there are others who are really good at winning elections. Some have won multiple times, and some have won in really big states that are really important, but they haven't been in a whole lot of the big fights over the last couple of years. There's only one candidate out of the 17 that's running for president of the United States who's actually done both, who has fought and won, not just 3 elections in 4 years in a blue state, but who has fought and won and actually got results without compromising my common sense conservative principles. If that's what you want out of the next president, someone who's not just going to fight, but someone who can fight and win. Fight and win for people like you. Fight and win for people like your families. Fight and win for the American people and actually get results without compromising, then I ask for your vote, because that's the candidate I am. That's the governor I've been in the past, and that's the kind of president, with your help, I'll be going forward. And so that's why I'm asking for your help and your assistance here tonight. And I'd love to be your nominee, because I'd love to have that battle with Hillary Clinton. I mean, some of you may have saw the video the other day. I was at the Iowa State Fair, and they thought they'd intimidate me by busing in some protesters from somewhere else. Even a guy that almost jumped up on the stage in front of me, and I said, hey, I'm not intimidated of you, sir. I took on 100,000 protesters. I didn't back down from them. I didn't back down from the big government union bosses. I didn't back down from the liberal special interests from Washington. Heck, I didn't back down from the leadership of my own party and the establishment of my own party. I'm not going to back down from any protesters, and I'm certainly not going to back down from anybody in Washington who stands in the way of doing the right thing for you. And I'd love to take that message to Hillary Clinton in the debates going forward. Because you see, Hillary Clinton isn't about the middle class, she's about the ruling class. And it starts with her and her family. They think there's a different set of rules for them than there is for everybody else. This email server alone suggests it's one of two things, and they both begin with the same letter. She's either illegal or incompetent. Probably both. Probably both. I mean, as this judge suggested again today, at a minimum, she violated the rules of the federal government. But I think the more you look at it, she told us not long ago there was no sensitive information, there was no classified information, there was no top secret information. We now know there was sensitive and classified and, yes, top secret information. Either she's violated the law by knowingly allowing top secret information to go over an unsecured server. Think about that. It is sad to know this, but it's probably true. The Chinese and Russian governments probably know more about Hillary Clinton's email server than do the members of the United States Congress. And the sorry part about it is every day she used that server. Every day she used that server. She compromised America's national security. She compromised her position. She compromised her post. She compromised our family's safety in this country. She compromised every single one of you and your families and others across America. Either she violated the law or she was Secretary of State and didn't know what top secret information was. That makes her incompetent or illegal, and either disqualifies her from being President of the United States. And so my response is, if she's going to be their nominee, bring it on. I'm not intimidated by anybody, and I'm certainly not intimidated by Hillary Clinton, because I will stand up, and I believe the American people, not just Republicans, not just conservatives, I think people in this country want a president they can trust. We cannot trust Hillary Clinton, and I'd love to make that case at any time, anywhere in America, and with your help, that's exactly what we're going to do. And so with that, my wife's probably looking at me going, shut up, Scott. You get too worked up here. I'm going to take some questions, because if I get worked up on her, I could spend the whole night on that. Sure, please.
Thank you. I have something for you when we're done here. After the 9/11 attacks, there was a joint commission that was created in the House and the Senate. They spent a year investigating what happened. They wrote a 900-page report that they produced in December of 2002. One chapter of it was classified, speaking of classified information. It's 28 pages long, and it was about who funded the attack. Now, George Bush said himself that money is the lifeblood of terrorist organizations. Without the money, this couldn't have happened. Those men were fed, clothed, housed, paid for their flight school for a year. Half of the senators that were sitting at the time wrote an open letter calling for the declassification of it, and it's right here, and it said that Saudi Arabia paid the money for those men to attack us. Now, I know that you're a fighter for the vets. A lot of men and women have died in the war on terror. We're now ready to send more of our young men and women into yet another battlefield next to Saudi Arabia. And no one has investigated if they are the ones that were responsible. The 9/11 victims have a lawsuit against Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia has asked to have it dismissed. They need this information urgently. This is not old news. Would you join with us in advocating for those victims of that horrible day and all of the people that have died since then, and call for the immediate declassification of that chapter? And I give you the letter. Those senators said there was nothing in it that would upset our national security, Nothing was dangerous to release, and that was 12 long years ago.
Yes, I think we need to have as much information as we have to make sure we don't make those same sorts of mistakes again. I remember as a part of the report that I've read as well that isn't the classified portion, one of the things you might remember looking at it was they talked about flashing lights. That for years we had flashing lights that sent us warnings. And so we need to have as much information, not just about what happened prior to 9/11, but what's happening even today. I look around the world and you look at the challenges we have. In fact, I was supposed to be here in New Hampshire, I forget what the date was, but about a month ago. I was going to spend the day actually riding on a Harley for part of the day, having some fun, and I had to cancel it. And the reason I canceled it, I think you can certainly all understand why. One of the 4 Marines that was killed in Chattanooga was from Grantsburg, Wisconsin. 4 Marines were shot and killed that day. 3 others were shot. 1 naval petty officer also died shortly thereafter that. And so I went to be with his family and to be where I needed to be as governor of the state of Wisconsin and just as a fellow citizen. The reason why I say that, though, is not just with this, but in the days and months and years since, there have been many, many, many examples of those flashing red lights that we've ignored along the way, that portions of our government haven't taken action on. And I just think fundamentally in America, we not only need to have transparency, we need to have as much information as possible for our intelligence community, for our military personnel, for our local law enforcement, and for all those others who are trying to make sure that we live in a safe and a stable world going forward. And we've got to have the ability to do that. And as Americans, we need to share in that because a lot of time has gone by since 9/11, but the threats today are just as real. And in fact, I think since Barack Obama has been president and Hillary Clinton's been named the Secretary of State, arguably today, we're less safe now than we were even before the president and Hillary Clinton took office. That's not something that's worthy of running on.
Will you rearm our armed forces?
Will I rearm our armed forces? Yes. And again, this is one of the great things about being governor. I give you answers to questions that aren't in theory. As governor of the state of Wisconsin, I signed an executive order that allowed all of our military personnel in the National Guard to be armed in the state of Wisconsin at our 4 recruiting centers, as well as other places where they were open and accessible to the public. To me, I think I understand why at the end of the Cold War, there may have been decisions that thought maybe back then things had changed, but we're in a different world. I mean, per your question as well, we're in a different world. Our enemy is no longer something like communism, which can be contained. Our enemy is radical Islamic terrorism. It is a threat not just in places like Iraq or Syria or elsewhere throughout the Middle East. It is a threat around the world, and increasingly it's potentially a threat here in the United States. Our men and women in uniform are targets, whether they're in active duty, they're reservists, or they're members of the National Guard, and they need to be armed here on American soil. Sure. I'll go right down the line. You go next. I'll go 3 here, and then I'll zoom around, so I'm not ignoring you over here, but go right down the line.
Will you require, or what, would you require that the members of Congress follow all of the laws that they pass? And if you do, how would you intend to institute that policy? And do you believe in term limits?
Yes, yes, and yes. So that's pretty good. I'll go in reverse order there so I remember right. But term limits, yeah, I believe it's good enough for the president. It should be good for members of the House and the Senate, for that matter, members of the federal bench. To me, and I'd even say the president's 8 years, why not 12, so it evens out between the House and the Senate. But I've always lived by, I've been in elected office for a while. I've self-practiced term limits. It was either move to something else or move out. In fact, many years ago when I was elected the Milwaukee County Executive, the first and only Republican to hold that position, I was about ready to move on to the private sector, and I saw a big scandal in the county at the time. And even though everybody with any sanity in politics said, there's no way you can win this. It's crazy to go into Milwaukee County, which is filled with about 2-to-1, almost 3-to-1 margin on Democrats over Republicans. I saw a problem, and I stood up and did something about it. I've tried to do this as governor. I'm certainly looking to do that as president. But I think in any position you're there more than 10 to 12 years, you become complacent. People start looking over their shoulder and worry more about the next election than they do about the next generation. What I tried to do with the challenge I gave to lawmakers in my state, and I was benefited by the fact that of my 2 chambers in the lower house, 27 new Republicans were elected the year I was elected, and so they were right there with me. A lot of them were citizen lawmakers. They were ready to put in a couple years and then go back to their jobs. That's what our founders intended. That's the kind of premise they had. Go and serve for a while, do your job, and then go back to doing something else. So term limits to me make sense. In terms of living by the same rules, which kind of ties into the term limits. Yeah, I think Congress should never pass a law that they can't live with themselves. 100% believe that. How do you make that happen? It varies in the laws themselves. Some of them they have to do. I wouldn't sign new laws that didn't apply to them going forward. In terms of other example, I'll give you one specific example of something I can do through executive action, and I'm not big on executive action, but you can undo things this president's done. So the list of things that I won't undo of this president is probably shorter than the list of things I'll undo with him. But, you know, there's a series of things, everything from terminating the bad deal with Iran on day one to getting rid of a bunch of the bad EPA regulations and other things. But this one specifically involves Congress. This week I announced my plan. We call it the Day One Patient Freedom Plan to repeal Obamacare entirely and put patients and families back in charge. I'm one of, I think one or two other candidates are the only ones who actually have actual plans. So I'm laying out real solutions, but specific to your point, in our plan to make Congress repeal Obamacare immediately. Because remember, part of the reason why I'm upset with the House and the Senate leadership amongst Republicans is they told us, we got a House, if you get a Senate, we'll repeal Obamacare. Well, they've had the majority in both houses since January, and where's the bill to repeal Obamacare? They haven't sent it to the president. I know he's going to veto it, but heck, show the American people that you've got the courage to do it, and make him veto it, and then we'll take that to the American people in this presidential election and say, here's the contrast. But so how we get it done immediately, because the press, when I came out with this, said, well, how are you going to make this happen? I said, it's simple. We're going to send the bill up on day one, and then on day one as well, it's just why we call it the Day One Patient Freedom Plan, I'm going to sign an executive order that undoes the special deal that President Barack Obama gave to the members of Congress that doesn't require them to live under the same measures of Obamacare. So that executive order will force Congress on day one to live under the same rules for Obamacare like all the rest of society. We believe once they do that, there'll be a pretty big incentive for them to go past that. So I'll take this one, and then if you got some on this side, I'll come on over here too. Go ahead.
Governor, how you doing? My name is Stephen Steiner from Conway. We've met before on the boat,
Good
but
to see you.
I lost my son to a drug overdose 14 years ago. So when I see our government not enforcing drug laws across the country, it bothers me. So when I hear politicians talk about defunding for the immigration problem, I want to know, I know you're going to enforce drug laws, the federal drug laws. I want to know how can we get the states that, including New Hampshire as far as I'm concerned, back in line so we can have better kids and we don't have these problems, our families are being torn apart. Would you defund money going to these states? Because we got to do something. We're just losing too many of our kids to the heroin and everything else.
Thanks. I'll sit that down. Well, first off, my sympathies to you. I've got two boys, so I can only imagine that kind of a circumstance that you've gone through, and so my heart goes out to you for that. Boy, you touched on a number of things there. One, we just need to stand up in general and start enforcing the law in this country. One of the problems with the current administration is they pick and choose the laws they want to enforce. To me, I think a lot of these laws are better suited at the state level than the federal level. But as long as we got laws in the books, I'm not going to selectively say, I'm not going to enforce this one, but I am going to enforce that one. When it comes to drugs overall, I believe that even drugs like marijuana, and I realize there may be somebody in this crowd who disagrees with me, but I, for so many years, have worked with law enforcement, including sheriffs in both political parties who've said to me, Scott, they said, Governor, don't legalize marijuana in Wisconsin because it's a gateway drug to all these other drugs. And so I'm going to stand with law enforcement in my state and make that case. And while there's a whole lot of drugs I'm concerned about, one of the ones that's increasingly a concern to me, it's something we've done over the last 2 years in my state, is one I hear a lot about here. I remember talking to the one of the first people to bring it up was the mayor of Manchester, brought this up to me, but others have since, is of course heroin. And it's a drug that increasingly is taking our young people in rural areas. It's not, a lot of times you think of drugs, you think of big urban areas, and there are some that are more prevalent there, but it's increasingly in rural areas. And it's one of those drugs where I often say, people don't take heroin, it takes them. And it's increasingly difficult. And what we need is not just to uphold the law, to go after people who are supplying the drugs, but then also provide for our judiciary and our legal system options to help people not necessarily go to prison, to find alternatives to incarceration for those who are drug addicts, to get the kind of help and assistance they need. Because until we break that habit, until we break that cycle, we're just bringing people in and out of the troubles. And so there's a whole bunch of things. In our state, we did what we call the HOPE Initiative. Sadly, one of our state lawmakers, the chair of our budget committee, his daughter nearly overdosed twice on heroin. She's been in and out of jail. It's been a real personal tragedy for him and his family. And so we worked with John Nygren to go out and do what we call the HOPE Agenda, which was a series of things. They weren't about greater incarceration. They were about providing alternatives, trying to help collect more prescription drugs. I mean, this may sound odd to some, but one of the big challenges for a lot of our young people is they get hooked first on prescription drugs that aren't theirs, and they don't think it's a problem because it's not illegal. But they start getting, and then with the opiate addiction, next thing they know, that drags them into heroin. A lot of people, unfortunately, even though this is legal, OxyContin, to their credit, has changed the way they distribute this. For a while, OxyContin was something that people got addicted to and then had to look on to the next thing. So we tried to look at as many different ways to go after collecting prescription drugs, providing incentives for local communities to do that, help pharmacies make sure they track who was getting certain types of drugs so that they weren't opening the door, particularly the young people, to following into these addictions. Yeah?
The one thing I want to say, in 14 years since the death of my son, you're the first person I talked to in yours that knows what he's talking about. God help. God, thank you.
Thanks. Sure.
Dave Moorhead, Plymouth. First of all, a statement about Hillary Clinton you missed. She's responsible for the death of 4 great men, and nobody points that out.
Yep.
I'm a totally disabled vet. There's several others in the room here that are disabled and stuff. And there is a problem with the VA and things like that. I'm sure you've been up on this and know what's going on. Can we get your thoughts on it?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first off, again, as I mentioned on the way in, thank you for your service. That's something. The other day I was at an event where it's Veterans Day. I said Veterans Day should be every day, but we particularly appreciate those days where we called that out. Yeah, I'm proud of what we did in our state, not only to restore our state GI Bill, which is more generous than the federal one. What we did to we actually opened a new veterans home. We increased some of the care for our veterans. What's happened with the VA is an absolute despicable disaster, and it's just it is sadly typical of the federal government because nobody's really been held accountable for the problems. And the problems, and I often say this, that we owe it to our men and women in uniform, those just coming home and those who've been home for some time, not only access to quality, but to timely health care. Because one of the biggest problems, particularly for a lot of the men and women who've returned of late, is, and it's not just in traditional health care, many times it's behavioral health care, they're not getting it in time. It's not just the quality, it's the delay, it's the wait. And so, in my view, we need to put renewed accountability, not just resources, but accountability for actions being done within our hospitals and our clinics, within the Veterans Administration system, for sure. But we also, while that's happening, and you know it here because New Hampshire is one of the few states that already has broader access for the choice card program because of the fact of proximity to a VA. Well, exactly. I'm going there, and that's where I'm going. You have access to it, but it is a complete abysmal failure. And to me, not only for those within geographic regions like New Hampshire, I think there should be a choice for any veteran in America, no matter what state they live in, no matter how close they are to a VA hospital or clinic, to say, we're going to make sure that you either get the quality and timely health care you need and deserve at a VA hospital or clinic that's close to you, And if you don't, whether you live close or not, we're going to make sure that if you don't, you have a card that you can take to any reasonable, respectable health care provider anywhere in the nation and get the quality and timely health care that we should demand of a free and just nation like America. Yeah, the plan I talked about the other day, the question was, what would I specifically change in Obamacare? And I said, well, a couple things. One, my proposal is two parts. First step is I propose repealing Obamacare entirely, 100% gone. It's all gone. All the taxes, all the spending, the federal mandate, everything is gone. Then the replace is multiple pieces to it. With the changes we're proposing, the reforms we put in, as well as the outright 100% repeal, first off, I believe that that alone, and the reforms we're including in this package, will see premiums for everybody, not just for those without employer-based health care, will go down. So if you get your health insurance from your employer, you'll be able to continue to do that. That won't be affected, other than the fact that for you and your employer, the premiums will probably go down. Secondly, for those who do not have access to employer-based health insurance, could be somebody working part-time and maybe going to school, could be somebody else who maybe left to start their own business. Whatever the circumstances, we provide a refundable tax credit that varies by age, and the reason for that, people in the media ask me why by age. Well, because before Obamacare, we knew that the older people are by certain age brackets, the more your health insurance typically costs. And so it goes up. For the higher the cost is, it goes up by age category. So we provide a refundable tax credit that's available to anyone in America who doesn't have employer-based health insurance to go out on their own. They're not mandated, unlike Obamacare, where it was a federal mandate. We say you have the freedom. It's why we call it the Day One Patient Freedom Plan. You can go out and take that refundable tax credit and buy the health insurance plan you want. We put in a series of other reforms that say no longer you prohibited from buying it over state lines. If you want to get together with a bunch of if you're small business owners or farmers or others and you want to get together as consumers and go out and purchase it as a group, you can pool together and do that. You're not restricted. The only specific thing we put in there that that's similar to what was stated in the previous law is we do say that by law, no person can be dropped from coverage or see their coverage go up because of a pre-existing condition or because they get sick. That's something I heard from Republicans and Democrats alike that said that's really critically important. So we put that in our plan. And then we provide a number of other reforms that help drive down the costs. We put incentives for states to put in place meaningful lawsuit reform so that states would put in place reforms to allow healthcare professionals to make sure they do procedures and tests based on medical needs and not because they're trying to avoid frivolous lawsuits which drive up healthcare costs. And then the other big thing we do, and it's part of an overriding principle, not just on Obamacare, but overall, I think the more we take out of the federal government and send it back to the states, the better. So in Medicaid, I send that all back to the state government. What's that? If you're unemployed, well, that would be part of it. You'd get a tax credit as well. So again, that's a similar. Well, it's refundable, so you get it regardless of whether you have a tax liability or not. You would get it in that instance, so you could apply it for that, and there'd be a series of other conditions. Of course, our goal, and you also, as long as you have, so you'd get several months if you went from unemployment or went from employment to unemployment, you'd have a grace period there as well to be able to get an alternative plan. All those things tied together, but the idea here being, yeah, we want to help people get access to affordable and accessible health care. We want more quality and more choice, but we want it based on the freedom of the individual. No mandate, no federal requirement. It's all up to that person to control, not just to control your health care, but to control your money. One other thing I forgot to mention, we also, for everybody, put up to $1,000 as well. If you want to set up what's called the health savings account, it's kind of like a flex account, you can do that. We lift the restrictions as to how much you can put into that, and we allow you to carry those plans over to your children or to other family members with the idea being it's your money, you should be able to control it. That to me you may have saw it yesterday, I think Wall Street Journal did an editorial about it, plenty of others, National Review, others have said this is one of the best common sense, conservative, patient-centered alternatives to the government-dominated Obamacare. And to me, that's not just with that, but over the next couple of weeks when I'm back here and elsewhere, we're going to continue to talk about big, bold solutions. Because it's not enough to just have phrases. You got to have solutions. You got to tell people what you're going to do and how you're going to do it. And that's what we're going to do. That's how we got done the reforms we did. We didn't just have ideas. We said, here's what we're going to do. Here's our solutions. Here's what we're going to follow up on. Sure. Thanks.
Governor, thank you for being here, and thank you for taking my question. My question to you is, as president, what are you going to do to stop union-dominated National Labor Relations Board and roll back some of its decisions, like the ambush election rule that just passed?
Yeah, we're going to, I'll give you a preview because I don't want to step on our announcement. We're going to talk within the next month, just as we did with Obamacare, about reforms we're going to put in place when it comes to labor issues, particularly not just with the Labor Relations Board, but also with public, big government unions. Because even Franklin Delano Roosevelt, not exactly a conservative icon, FDR, and I got PolitiFact on this once because people thought there's no way this is true, but FDR indeed said that there's no need for collective bargaining in the public sector because he pointed out unions were set up. Unions were set up, and once upon a time, and there's still good, decent unions that work in the private sector. That's wonderful. But unions were set up many, many years ago, in many ways, to protect employees from their employer, from bad working conditions, from long hours, all things now that the government itself more or less intervenes on. But Roosevelt's point back then was, well, why do you need a union to protect yourself from the government? Because the government, we are the government. The government's the people. And so who is it protecting you from but yourself? And part of the reason why I did what I did in my state, by taking on the power from the big government unions, which was obstructing both state and local governments, was because I saw this vicious cycle where the taxpayers' money was going to be spent on legitimate wages and benefits, but on top of that, on labor dues, on union dues that then went to unions that used that money for political purposes and interviewed candidates who they then based their support on, largely based on how many more employees, how much bigger the benefits would be, and never in that circle was there anybody advocating for the hardworking taxpayer. And so that's, to me, one of the things where I got the biggest pushback, surprisingly, from a lot of Republicans on, because there were a lot of Republicans that didn't want to take that on because, they didn't mind some of these other battles, but they were worried that, in some of their jurisdictions, they were getting along just fine with the local union leader because they didn't have a contested race and they didn't really want to shake things up. And I said, we came in and inherited a $3.6 billion budget deficit. And we said, I'm not going to raise taxes because that would devastate the economy. I'm not going to lay off 10 to 15,000 public employees because I believe in smaller government, but you get there through managed reform. You don't get there through random pink slips. And I said, I'm not going to cut a couple $1 billion out of Medicaid because that would hurt needy families, children, and seniors. And so the good news of what we did is our reforms, much like some of the reforms we're going to talk about at the federal level in the future, are things that didn't just change temporarily. They transformed things long term. We didn't just balance our budgets. We helped our local governments, our school boards, our cities, our counties, our municipalities, not just balance their budgets, but run their government better. I'll give you one good example. In my state, schools, because of those reforms, no longer have seniority or tenure. Now they can hire and fire based on merit. They can pay based on performance. They can put the best and the brightest in the classroom. And schools are better because of it. Sure, way back there, sir.
Yes, Governor, I would like to ask the question, what about the veterans who are trying to get a VA disability? I know some veterans that have been fighting for 6, 7 years. What will you do about that? I myself, I have 2 caregivers. One of them is a Vietnam vet who helps me out, gets me dressed. He does my bladder and bowel care. There's so much bureaucracy I've gone through just to get him paid. Last month, I counted 16 people it had to go through. I asked the department head, what's this bureaucracy? He said, well, it's our checks and balances. What's your opinion on that?
First of all, again, as I said over here, thank you for your service. I appreciate that very much. A couple things. One, it's part of the reason why we need to take the powers and responsibilities that do not belong in the federal government and send them back to the state and the local governments where they're more effective and more efficient and definitely more accountable. So the areas where the federal government does have a legitimate role, we can demand that it does better. Right now, the problem with the federal government, I think, is it's too big to fail. Instead, we need a federal government that's small enough to succeed. And what I mean by that is, so you take the big chunks of different programs out there, send them to the states, let them work on it in a way that's more effective to the people in the states and ultimately to the American people. And then, whether it's in defense, whether it's in Social Security, whether it's in Medicare, or in this case, when it comes to veterans benefits in the VA system, similar to the question asked before, then we can actually hone in on making sure that things run. Because I believe the federal government's too big, too expansive, too much a part of our lives. I want to rein it in. But unlike some in Washington who don't like a big government, which is me as well, I don't hate everything in government. I think there are some places we should demand actually work. And in terms of VA veterans benefits, the VA system and other areas, I think that's a prime example. I think if we shift duties where they're most appropriate, then in the areas where the federal government plays a role, we should have a major impact. The second part of it goes into your question before, and that is, because of both, in part, the civil service system and in part because of the public employee unions, in many cases, many of these areas are set up where we have little or no accountability. And so when you look at the horrible stories we've heard, for example, about the VA system, where we just had tragic situations happen, who's being held accountable for that? We found that to be one of the big changes we made in Wisconsin was we can now hold people accountable, and so that people are doing well. High performers can get rewarded. Those that aren't either get disciplined or sometimes are asked to move on. We need to have that kind of accountability in the federal government just like we do in everywhere else in society.
Governor, we have time for 2 more questions.
What I see going on with the VA is it works in 3 systems. Deny, delay, and then the veteran dies. And it's absolutely disgusting. I help guide veterans through it. I already have my 100%. But because I've fought the system for so long, I try and guide other veterans and help them along and where to go. And I mean, it's absolutely drives me nuts. My primary care at the VA, she wants me to quit smoking. After dealing with the VA, I got to light up a cigarette while I'm arguing with them. I mean, hey.
So if I can fix the bureaucracy problems, can I get you to stop smoking? Is that pretty good? Is that a deal? A deal. I'll take your deal, right? My wife works for the Lung Association. I really love that. That'll be my added incentive to fix the system for you. So, sure, right here. Oh, here. You got 2 more here, ma'am. I'll go with you first, and then right here.
If you were to become president, do you have any kind of plans of correcting the fraud in the SSI?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think you look overall, one of the best things we did in our state government is we created a new inspector general's office to go after fraud. We did overall, that was part of several $100 million that we did early on in my Waste, Fraud, and Abuse Commission. We brought in not just government folks, I brought in outside folks from the private sector and tried to really wean into that. When it comes to Medicaid and Social Security, disability, and other areas, we want to make sure we clamp down on those areas because for people who legitimately need it, we want to make sure there's resources there. And it's something where, again, I go back to the problems. This may sound simple, but one of the things I loved about Ronald Reagan was he had big principles, and then he then told people to go out and implement them. He didn't get into the minutia on every single issue. So my big issue is, it's where I just fundamentally believe, I sound like a broken record, although I know my sons who are in their 20s would say, Dad, nobody knows what a broken record is anymore. Hopefully you can appreciate that. I sound like a scratch CD or a repeating iPod or something like that. But I will say this over and over again. I just fundamentally believe one of the most important things the next president can do if they really want to reform government, not just govern, but reform government, is take so much of that power out of Washington and send it back to the state and the local level. Something I think you all can appreciate, particularly here in New Hampshire. When you think about the size of the legislature and town hall meetings and things of that nature, that's about accountability, right? And so, but then for the areas where we do have a legitimate role to care for our fellow citizen, Then if we don't have so much of that there, then we can get our arms around that, and that's something that absolutely would be a priority. And again, for reasons I tell folks, not because we just want to cut things, because we want to make sure there are resources there for the people who legitimately need it. Sir?
Thank you, Senator Walker.
Governor.
Governor.
You can call me Scott, just don't call me Senator.
That's
I actually work for a living.
The, the last time the federal government worked for the American public was back in Reagan's days, really, as far as I'm concerned, as far as Republicans and Democrats working across the aisle to try to solve real problems. There isn't anybody in this room that doesn't understand we have immigration problems. We have a federal deficit problem. Today I read that the federal government has housing where people that are millionaires are now in public assisted housing, and HUD can't get them out because of the way the laws are written. Nobody's working for the American public. How are you going to get Congress, which is still Republicans and Democrats, to work across the aisle? Because you're going to need all the help you can get to do that, but we need to start working with some common sense across the aisle to solve problems in this country for the American public, because everybody in this country is frustrated today.
I agree. You're right, I agree. And I realized after I joked about that first part, I'm getting 100 calls on my cell phone after I'm done. Well, maybe not all 100 will call me, but at least a few I know. So my regards to, there are a number of good, hardworking United States senators, so my apologies. But it actually makes my point, because what makes governors and senators different, you know, senators vote on things, governors actually have to get them done. And so one of the reasons why before the president that we elected, who was a United States senator, the last time we elected a member of Congress was 1960. Why? Because I think Americans, regardless of party, want to know, can you get it done? And one of the best training grounds for wondering whether you can get it done or not is being a governor. I don't care if you're a Democrat or Republican. You can't hide behind anything else. You either get it done or you don't. And in our case, I remember at my inauguration, I said, what's the difference between Wisconsin and Washington? We actually get the job done. And it's why I've won, I believe, 3 elections in 4 years in a blue state. We didn't just carry Republicans almost universally across the board. We won 11, almost a 12-point margin of victory with independents. Why? Because in the end, most people who are independents aren't necessarily moderates or necessarily in the middle. They're just people who are dissatisfied with the choices they have. They're people who've been burned too many times before because politicians in both parties have made promises and then failed to deliver on them. So they're waiting to declare who they're going to vote for until they get some confidence they're going to do something about it. The reason we carried independence, and even a lot of people who said they didn't agree with me on everything, didn't agree with everything I did or every way I did it, they'd say, but you know what, he gets it done. And I think that's the biggest thing, at least I hear from folks across America, is they want people who are going to actually get things done, and they're going to hone in, I should say, on getting it done, not for themselves, not for the ruling class, but for, and not even just for themselves. You know, that, and I don't know if you guys told me it was the last question, or I got one more, but if it's the end, I don't know who said that, but I'll do one more over here and then wrap it up. But I'll just tell you, to me, on that point, you know, the biggest thing I hear, and why I think there's a number of candidates that have been going up in the polls who haven't been elected to any position is because people are trying to send a message that they're frustrated with Washington, they're frustrated with politicians, they're tired of people making promises, not delivering on them. And sometimes people say to me, that's anger. Yeah, there's anger. I'm angry about it too. But it's not just anger. You see, if it was just anger, people check out. They'd become cynical, they'd become non-voters, they would give up, they'd throw up their hands. What I hear from Americans are people, as you just pointed out, who aren't just saying for me or for you, you're saying, I got kids, I got grandkids. I'm not giving up on America. I love America. I love this country. I think the reason why you're all here tonight, why people take things so seriously here in New Hampshire, but I see it across the country as well, gives me hope and optimism. That people aren't just fed up, they're willing to do something about it. They're willing to stand up and say, you know what, for my children and my grandchildren's sake and all the others like them, I'm going to do something. I'm going to make this country better. I'm going to take the opportunity to lay it out there and say, I'm going to find men and women who are willing to stand with me and do the right thing. And that's the kind of president I want to be. every single day, someone who will fight and win, who will actually get things done in the issues that matter, and regardless of party. I'll take on the big government special interest in Washington. I'll take on the other party. I'll take on the leadership of my own party. I will do what's required to make this country great again. So you get the last one here.
How will you change the current status of America's power grid, especially with the EPA's new regulations?
Great question. In fact, the new rule they had just recently came out. They call it the Clean Power Plan. I call it the Costly Power Plan, because sadly, it will add tremendous cost, and even the EPA has admitted itself that it will have a marginal, at best, impact on the overall environment across the globe. So for something that has a fraction of an impact globally, we're going to cost potentially tens of thousands of jobs, particularly in manufacturing. In my state, it's about 20,000 manufacturing jobs, similar amounts all across this country. It'll also see rates go up for most ratepayers, close to 19, 20% out there. That's a huge problem. It's just a prime example of where, I'm thinking about this, and I've got a son at Marquette, so I love the sweatshirt. I've got another son at the University of Wisconsin. But I'm thinking about my kids who are in Scouts. I'm an Eagle Scout. I believe your campsite should be cleaner. I was taught in Scouts, campsite should be cleaner when you leave than when you found it. So I believe in clean air, clean land, clean water. That's what I want for my children, and someday, they're in college now, hopefully someday after they graduate, get a job, get married, and have children, when I have grandchildren, hopefully in that order, someday when I have grandchildren, for them, I want them to have the same clean air, clean land, clean water. Because when I look around and I see New Hampshire, it makes me think of going up to Rhinelander, Wisconsin, or Eagle River, all sorts of beautiful places that look just like the beautiful scenery you have here. And that's what I want for my grandchildren, my kids to grow up and raise them in someday. But I also want to make sure my children have a job. And so the way this president has gone and the way that we see with Obama and Hillary Clinton and others, it's like they think you can choose between one or the other, but not both. I don't buy into that. I think we've got to have both out there. So to me, my point is, yeah, we can have things that preserve our environment, that protect our natural resources, but it's part of the reason why I believe in an all-the-above energy policy that gives us as many quality options as possible. For example, I'd approved the Keystone Pipeline on the very first day I was in office, so we have more options out there. And then actually to add to that on the grid, I also think it's part of our national security because we need to make sure we work with our utilities, our public service entities, and others out there to make sure that our grid is protected because, we think about airlines and all those other things, and those are important with TSA, but before 9/11, we weren't thinking about big airplanes either. And so we need to make sure that all the things that are vital to our way of life, telecommunications, utilities, transportation outlets, all those things are protected. And we need a president who's actually on top of that and an administration who's going to take that on. That's incredibly important. That's incredibly insightful for somebody your age to have a good question like that. So it's a great way to end it up. Thanks for coming out. We'll take around and say hi to some pictures of that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Governor, for coming up and visiting us up here. We really appreciate it. And I think you're going to stick around and answer a few questions. And I actually have one I would like to talk to you about.
Sun coming up over New York City. School bus driver in a traffic jam.